Perfect. So today I'm going to talk about the history of education briefly, and then I'm going to tie it to this key topic that we're discussing on why your philosophy of education matters. Now, why are we having such a conversation at such a time? I will explain here shortly. And the reason is actually when you look at thinking machines, we call them, when machines are thinking, quote unquote, or when they possess some sort of knowledge, which Dr. Paul Meyer told us last week, that they don't really have knowledge, right? They're very good at retrieval. What we'll realize is that the nature of our school systems needs to be addressed because our schools were built at a time where there was scarcity of knowledge. Now there's ubiquity of knowledge, and therefore, I'll give you an analogy of why this issue keeps coming to my mind regularly. When you think about back in the 1800s, a country has to make a decision of how do we utilize the talents and the abilities of our people to the max so that we're not lacking in resources. That is one of the questions that the countries had to deal with. And what they did was, and some of this has been documented in a TED Talk, and Sugata Mitra talks about the idea of human beings basically as computers, essentially. And therefore, our education system and the training that came with it was built in such a way as to ensure that the government had certain things taken care of. It wasn't fundamentally built on how do we equip human beings to flourish. So our education system was not built around that. And so what we're going to discuss today is what does this mean if we have an opportunity to basically take back education, and where do we start? What are some practical steps? Well, the first one I'll tell you right away is that parents need to take the driver's seat a lot more than they might have ever done before. There might have been a time in history where maybe parents did not, could have given that out to the teachers or the school districts and so on and so forth. But we're living in a time where parents can actually be more educated in how best to educate their children. We're living in a time where parents can actually be better educated in educating their children than any school system, even if the parents don't have a college degree, even if the parents have no degree in education. Because the currency of success of 10 years ago is no longer the currency of success of today as it relates to education. What is this currency of success that I'm talking about? And then I have a few slides, but I might actually have, let me see, I might have two screens. Otherwise, I'll just share the slides after with everybody. So let's see. Okay. So what's going to happen is that when we look at the history of education, give me 1 second. I'm going to just add, let's see. Okay. So we should have be able to chat with the attendees then. So when we look at the history of education, what we'll realize is that I divide world history into 4 categories: ancient, Middle Ages, early modern, and modern history. And actually, let me demonstrate this over here with a quick whiteboard. So when we look at the history of education, we'll see we have to look at the history we have to look at the history of history, so to speak. And what we'll realize is when you divide history up, so if you divide history up into 4 time periods, this is the first time period. Let's just label as 1, 2, 3, and 4. The first time period here would be, let's say, 2400 BC, all the way to, let's say, 476 AD. Okay, sorry, my marker is writing slow here. So you go from 2026 BC to 476 to AD 476. Then you go from 476 to 1476. And then you go from 1476 to 1776. And then you go from 1776 to the present. So if you divide history into those 4 time periods, the education system that you see today, a lot of that falls into 1776 to 2026. But even within that time period, and sorry, I'll repeat the time periods, but the writing, it doesn't look too great with my marker. So 24 BC to 476 AD is one time period. I call that ancient history. Then we have 476 AD to 1476 AD. Then we have 1776 AD. I'm sorry, 1476 AD to 1776 AD, and then 1776 or AD 1776 to 2026. What you realize is a lot of the education we have today is actually all around the fourth category. But here's what's interesting. That fourth category, you can split it in two, the first half of it and the second half of it. And what you realize is this. I would argue that some of the greatest breakthroughs, right, came even before the 1850s to 1900s. So that means that our current education system, right, we have to begin to ask questions of where have we come from, where are we now, and why are we where we are, and should we continue the way we're going? My argument is that if we don't understand the philosophy of education, I apologize. My computer just reset. Apologies there. So what I was saying is that when we look at the history of education, around 1776 to 2026, that's where we started getting some of this particular view that we have in education and the structure that we have. And so what I want to argue with society, well, what I want to encourage society to reflect on is the fact that this current system has only been around for so long, but it has to go, we have to go back and ask some questions. And so that's what we're going to begin today. Now, my philosophy of education is actually one of the reasons why I started bringing this topic more and more. I found that there is a particular author that does a very good job of describing the philosophy of education that I think is worth exploring and diving into. And it's called the Charlotte Mason model, the Charlotte Mason model. And I'm going to describe a little bit of Charlotte Mason's story, and then we can look at the model in more detail. Charlotte Mason. Okay, so before I go into mine, let me give you some questions to ask as you consider what your philosophy of education is. So here are some questions you need to ask. What is a human being? What is the definition of a human being as it ties to your definition of your philosophy of education? If we believe that human beings were created in the image of God for a purpose, that will affect how we interact with those human beings. Are human beings a vessel that needs to be filled, or are human beings something more like the word somebody else uses is that basically a fire that needs to be ignited, or like they have weeds and we need to find ways to help them learn, right, to nurture around the weeds that they might have. So give me 1 second. I'm actually going to share my screen here. I have a second screen and it's going to show my slides. So let me just put it in here. Let's see. I apologize. It broke up there. Let's see. Okay, perfect. So, Chinon, Mr. Chinon, so if you don't mind, if you can promote the other one that is coming up as a panelist as well, and then I'll share my screen from that one.
All right.
Perfect. So it's just opening. Okay, so while this is loading, can while this is loading, if you guys can, let me see. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Perfect. So why your philosophy of education matters, right? So I'm going to talk about Charlotte Mason, human formation, and the future of school that is shaped, the future of school in an AI-shaped age. And one of the things you will realize is that we all have to answer some questions, right? What is school for? Is it for information? Is it for employment? Is it for formation? Is it for wisdom? You see, one of the things that I think is really critical at such a time as this is I believe that parents need to realize that the education system that was built around the 1800s was not built for formation of children and for human flourishing. I want to repeat it again, and I'm just being as blunt as I can be to help parents understand the moment we're in. When the education system was designed, they were not thinking about how do we help your children become the best they can be. It was more of what is the most efficient way to get a certain outcome. Now we live in a day where the things that schools were training us for, machines can do better than us in many of those things. That means we need to step back and ask, why are we doing it the way we're doing it? And I'll give you another quick example. When you think about education, think about your education parents growing up. I was blessed to have wonderful teachers, and I'm grateful for the teachers that I had. I still have some of my notebooks here and some of my textbooks. I even had one of them that I pulled out that I got when I was in Nigeria, right? This is called New School Chemistry by Oseyo Ababio, right? We were blessed to study. Let me just give a plug for a second. And I know some of the parents know my position. I'm sorry to pick on the situation, but if your children are studying in America, you have to find a buffer system for them because they are not getting the rigor that we got when we were studying books like Ababio. And then they would ask us questions that were pretty much almost anything from books like this. But I bring that up to say, we sat down in class, we took notes, we gave back the answers when they asked us the questions. Parents, the AI systems are now passing us on exams. That means if a company is trying to hire somebody, their most fundamental yardstick of success is not can you pass a test. Even though passing the test again is not a bad thing, but that's not why they want a person. Why they want a person is that the person knows how to think critically, the person knows how to collaborate, the person knows how to learn, they know how to learn quickly, they know how to refine and get down to the details of what they need to learn. But our schools are not teaching all the fundamental things now that those students will need. That means every parent needs to call their family together and say, here's the deal. Even if you attend a traditional school, you also need to get some extra support that gets you into the key items that the school, that the society or that the job places might need. But fundamentally, the things that the job places need today are the things that people like Charlotte Mason would have encouraged us to learn in the first place. Let me give you an example. If you go to school and you're the best in your class, you've studied all the notes, and you've memorized all this information, and you go to the workplace and you say, I'm here to get a job because I memorized a lot. Any job place that understands how AI works and understands the status of where things are today is like, why? Why should I care? If I needed the answers to what is the reaction between carbon and hydrogen and oxygen in such and such a proportion, I'm not looking for a human being who just knows that answer off the top of their heads. I'm looking for a human being who not only can get the answer if they need to get the answer, but they can think beyond the question I even asked them in the first place. The time has come to raise children to be like Michael Faraday, to be like James Clerk Maxwell, to raise people to think for themselves, to think critically, to think analytically, to think on their feet, to love learning for its own sake, not for the sake of passing a test. That's the moment we are in history. If you train your children to be like the best mathematicians and scientists in history, the job places will be begging for your children to work for them. Now, what's interesting is that it's not enough for us to just say we want them to get the jobs. No, there's another trait of the moment that we're in, which schools are not paying enough attention to. And that trait is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. Children need to learn how to identify problems, how to solve problems, how to tackle opportunities that look like they're impossible. Children need to be thinking outside the box. But our schools don't always teach us to think outside the box. That's what we need to make sure we grow in, is teaching our children how to think outside the box. So give me 1 second here, sorry. So information, employment, formation, wisdom, we have to ask ourselves, what is school for? So parents, feel free to interact with the host as we keep moving through in our slides. So one of the key words that comes to mind in the ancient world, they talk about the word paideia, the formation of a person fitted to reason well, speak well, and live well. Education that sought virtue. Education that sought virtue. And so one of the schools that talks a lot about this are these schools called classical schools. And classical schools talk about the idea of not just learning information, but as they go through the stages, then they start doing things in rhetoric. They start learning how to debate. These are some of the important elements, I believe, that we need to make sure that are being taught to our children. At such a time as this, we need to make sure that children are learning how to navigate not just information, but how to speak well and how to live well. So in the Middle Ages, we had, a certain kind of education. Now, remember, we talked about ancient history, Middle Ages, early modern, and modern history. So in the Middle Ages, we got this idea they called, the liberal arts, which has to do with grammar and logic and rhetoric, and then arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. And then the issues of faith and reason were being discussed. And the university, right, was communities of teachers and students that formed durable institutions of inquiry. Here's what's interesting in the history of education. Remember the university called Oxford University, Cambridge University? Those universities came during this time. Oxford University came around 1100, AD 1100, and then Cambridge came later on, not too long after. Before this, one of the first universities in the world was called the University of Bologna. And before that, there was one in Morocco that you would tie back to. Here's something I find interesting about the history of education, though. Education and religion have essentially almost been always connected. Education and religion have almost always been connected. So it is impossible to say, oh, my school system doesn't have a religion of some sort. No, there is always a connection. Even if the religion is secular humanism, which is the idea that, humans are it, education essentially has a tie. So here's why. Before the first university in Europe, there was a university in Morocco, but that was tied to Islam. Then you get to Europe, you start getting universities, and they were more from the Catholic Church. And then you start getting some universities that might be tied to the Anglican Church. Universities and just places of learning have to answer the fundamental question of also, what is the worldview that drives the education system? And that's part of what we're discussing today. And I'll begin to wrap up from some of the history here in a second. So knowledge belong together. Education asks how the parts relate to the whole. So in the early modern historical period of education, the printing press came. This was around 1450. When the printing press came, right, books widened access to ideas far beyond a single teacher or monastery, right? Before this, people used to handwrite their notes and handwrite everything. And now we got the printing press. The printing press was a big deal, right? There was, of course, observation. There was science. These things were picking up. We're now about 1500 or AD 1500. Then we came to the 19th and the 20th century, which is the 1800s and the 1900s. So modern schooling started to scale. We wanted to get access to as many people as possible. There was standardization and there was specialization. So access expanded, but did formation become thinner? I would say yes. And what I mean by formation becoming thinner is that the point of the school systems was to try to get a certain kind of person to do a certain kind of job. It wasn't for that person to become all that they were created to be. And that's what Mr. Amos is saying, is that the time has come for us to go back to answer the question, what is school for in an age where machines can think? Quote unquote think, and they have knowledge, right? This changes the paradigm. This is not a call to lower the bar. This is not a call to tell people not to study. This is not a call for that. This is a call to say you need to double or triple what your children are doing because your children have the most powerful calculator in history. Your children now have the most powerful calculators in history. And they're asking, and schools are still asking some of your children the same questions they asked me when all I had was a textbook and one teacher. Our children now have a massive amount of resources. That means that the question is no longer whether they can access information, but whether they have the interests to go after knowledge, like people like Michael Faraday did. There's a book that I did a video on our YouTube channel, which is on the Counting to Calculus YouTube channel. If anybody can please find that and put it in the chat, that'll be great. It's just on the Counting to Calculus YouTube channel, and it dropped last night. And the book has to do with Michael Faraday's work, right? Let me see if I can pull out his work here. I'll find it here in a second. People like Michael Faraday and Leonard Euler, right? I did another video on Leonard Euler. These guys were willing to think outside the box. And we need to encourage your children to think outside the box. What does that mean? Let's look at a couple more slides and we'll discuss it. What kind of person should education form? Remember, we've talked about virtue from ancient education systems, the medieval period, the early modern period, and then the modern period, right? That's what we've scaled. The modern education system is just we've scaled up a certain type of education. The problem is that kind of education, AI undermines it. AI undercuts it. Let me tell you what happened. Yesterday, my wife sent me a news article. So there's something called agentic AI. And I've been warning that it's going to come and it's going to destroy education if education doesn't change. Well, yesterday it came out that college students are now using agentic AI systems in school. I'm not talking about using this to plan your trip. So what agentic AI does is basically think about having an employee that you can send to go work for you to do things, right? This is the book that I was referring to. I made a video about it. And it basically talks about, it's called Quantum Mechanics and the MRI Machine. And then this is the other book, which is the Faraday Maxwell and the electromagnetic field. Parents, these are the types of books. Well, at least this one. This one is more accessible, I think, to everybody. It says Faraday Maxwell and the electromagnetic field. Parents, this is the type of book that your children should be reading outside of school so they learn to think like people like Leonard Euler. This is another one your children should be reading. So what I'm trying to get at is, parents, if everybody has all this knowledge and everybody conforms and looks the same, then that's not what's going to make everybody get a job in the AI revolution. It's the people that went above and beyond. So when you look at people like Michael Faraday, they were willing to do the work, not just their day job, but to do more research. And so this agentic AI system, here's what it's doing in schools now. A student can log into an agentic AI system and they can make the AI do their work for them without them ever knowing that an assignment was even given. So it's not just that students will go use the AI to do the assignment. There are now AI systems you can program that will know when an assignment has been assigned. It can complete the assignment and it can upload the assignment and the student doesn't even know there was an assignment. What does this mean for our education system? This means we need to rethink what we're doing and we need to move fast. Parents, there's an urgency in my heart because we have to move fast because there will be a lot of children that will graduate but not know anything. That is the world we're living in. So parents have to be way more informed in their children's lives and be asking, what kind of person is this education forming in my child? So anthropology, right? The study of man. That is a topic we need to dive into, and we'll do that at a different Saturday school. So this is officially our first Saturday school, by the way, parents. Saturday school is when we organize different guest lectures, SAT prep, ACT prep, different activities. We even have chess clubs and different clubs. We want children to come and their parents to come and learn together, and you just pick what time works best for you. So we have a schedule of the Saturday session, and maybe if Chinonso can track it down, we can share that on the screen after as well. So Charlotte Mason enters the story in 1842. So she was born in 1842, and I would argue that Charlotte Mason is one of the most important people in the history of education. She was an English educator whose work would outlast her century. Now, there's another person you guys might know called Dorothy Sayers, who's also quite important in the history of education. Both of them were British, which is very interesting, right? There's something about education in England, and I think that we need to study more in detail. So the PNEU begins in 1887. The Parents' National Educational Union joins parents and teachers around educational principles. Essentially, by God's grace, I think Chinonso, you might agree, that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring parents and educators, right? Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're trying to say parents and educators and children, let's come together. Let's spend time together, right? And then she has the House of Education, which prepares teachers for a generous, humane curriculum in 1892. Her work was institutional, not merely a method for the home. So she was a teacher, she was a lecturer, she was an institution builder, working amid the transformations of the late Victorian education. Remember, before this time period, children used to work in the factories. Remember, these were some hard times, right? And I'm not saying we need children to go back to the factories. However, when we move from the factories, we might have swung too far to another factory of education being too standardized and not enough of allowing for freedom and creativity and curiosity. So that's where Charlotte Mason comes in. By the way, let me go back. The quote, I apologize, is written, her name is just written on top of the persons. Children are born persons, right? They're not containers. They're not products to be optimized for output. They are persons to form and respect. This is her big word. Children are born persons. Children are born persons, meaning that they're created and they don't come to us like they're empty vessels. They come to us as people that need to be formed into something unique, right? That's who God has made them to be. So the atmosphere matters. Teachers on this call, have you noticed that sometimes when you're teaching a subject, it's not so much about the subject matter, it's the attitude your children have. It's the attitude that the person brings. That matters a lot more, I think. So let me begin to wrap up and then, Chino, so we can have a dialogue and Q&A. Education is more than a method. It is a way of life. So why does your philosophy of education matter? Because if you look at children as an empty vessel that needs to be filled, then you might focus more on just giving them information. But when you recognize that they are born persons for a purpose, that changes the conversation. So the atmosphere, the discipline, the life. There are three ways education forms the whole person. And we need to learn from people like Charlotte Mason, a world, right, that the child is breathing in. The culture, the language, the relationships, and the expectations surrounding a child will affect that child's excellence in education. Discipline matters in terms of the habits of mind and body that are formed deliberately, patiently, and thoughtfully. Charlotte Mason can teach us a lot on that as well. And then living ideas and a generous curriculum that nourishes the mind. Do you guys notice that I mentioned Michael Faraday? I mentioned James Clerk Maxwell. I mentioned Leonard Euler. Our children need to be learning about these people. Every idea your child learns in school, they need to go back and ask, why do I need to know this? Who came up with it, right? And so I got another book from the same author. This one is called The Fundamental Mathematics of Artificial Intelligence. So this is just giving you an example of how my mind works. So we hear about the technology. Amos says, give me a book on the mathematics. I want to understand who is behind this. So your children need to be asking, who is behind the ideas they're learning? And Charlotte Mason can teach us a lot about that. So let me go down to last couple of slides. AI does not remove the need for school. Information might be abundant, but access to information is not the same as human formation. So what we need to do then is that we need to give sustained, honest attention to reality. We need to attend to that. So school must form people who can attend to understanding reality. School must form people who can discern that the judgment, because judging the validity of something is going to be very important. School needs to deal with the idea of, okay, what are people creating? What are they solving? What problems are they tackling? And then school needs to be focused on serving. Use knowledge for the good of other people. Okay, let's go to the very end here. We need to build schools that form wise, capable, responsible human beings, not merely efficient users of machines. The future of education begins by rediscovering its purpose. So we need to understand that the philosophy of education matters first, and then the curriculum, and then the culture also, right? So the philosophy of education. So what is my philosophy of education? I believe that children are created in the image of God for a purpose, and we need to help them to become all that they were made to be. We need to invest in them. We need to listen to them. We need to have more dialogue with them. In a world that is changing so fast, we need them to understand first and foremost their identity. Who am I? That's the first question. When they understand that, and the fact that knowledge acquisition is just one of the things they can do but should not engulf their lives, then it makes it less likely for them to cheat. It makes it less likely for them to do things they shouldn't do in education because they understand the purpose of education. Then, does it matter what curriculum I use? Yes, it matters. And I want to encourage families to realize that your current school systems were built at a time when knowledge was scarce, where there wasn't enough, like you couldn't just get any knowledge you needed. Those days are completely over. Parents, you and I then need to say, and my wife and I homeschool, so we do a lot of these kinds of conversations too. We need to ask the question, is my child being challenged to the potential, or is my child just being lazy in a system that is not pushing them to go further? Is my child being stretched and growing, or is my child just managing? The era of managing has come to an end because machines are better than us at computation, at speed. We now need to ask the question, what is a human being for? What is education for? And I believe that we can find those answers in the Bible. We can find those answers as we pray and encourage our children to become who God made them to be. Thank you so much. Sorry it went longer than I would have thought, but I hope that you guys had some food for thought. Chinon, so over to you.
Thank you so much, Amos. We've gotten some great questions from our parents. That's a wonderful perspective you've just shared. And I know some of the parents have questions, but we'll begin with some of the very few common ones. So the first question here is, why does a parent's own philosophy of education matter, even if they are not the one teaching day to day in the school?
That's a very good question. And parents, the reason why this is, I think, really critical is that the teacher training colleges in America especially, and maybe around the world, that whole demographic, that whole institution, that whole industry is actually in trouble if it doesn't understand the moment that we're living in. Because imagine they're training teachers to go into the field to teach students in a certain method that is no longer relevant in the AI revolution. That means we need to retrain all teachers everywhere. That's number one. While we work to retrain teachers everywhere, who is going to step in and help their children? It's the parents. Parents, you actually have to step in now and realize you now have to be a teacher. Every parent has to be a teacher till further notice. Why do I say that? Because parents, this book I was showing you and all that, all the books your children could ever need are now on the internet. All the videos that explain all the concepts are now on the internet. Many schools in many communities in America, you can even take some live classes for free. So parents, you now have to become like the person who directs the traffic for your children, because the current school system will hold them back. And this is nothing against honest, hardworking teachers in the school system. No, the system doesn't move. It doesn't adjust as fast as it needs to when it needs to, if that makes sense. So parents, the question is, do we allow children to stay in a system that will literally produce traits that will not be valuable in the next 5 to 10 years? Or do we ensure, and this is where parents have to step in, do we ensure that our children know how to learn? Do we ensure that we even understand where the education system came from? And the fact that the education system is actually expired? When did the education system expire? It wasn't when AI came. That's the mistake many people are making. The education system didn't expire when AI came. I would argue it expired on September 4th, 1998. What happened on September 4th, 1998? The moment Google became available, the modern education system expired. What I mean by that is that means that you could find, I remember those days, I would be learning mathematics. This is new general mathematics. I remember those days, I'll be learning mathematics, and if I wanted to learn a specific concept, I had to basically wait. Let's say I finish this book. This is the SS3 version. But let's say I finish, this is the 12th grade version. Let's say I finish the 7th grade version. I had to wait to go into the next grade level to get the next book. Parents, what happens when all the books, and I'm sorry I put it far away. I was going to show you the other ones. What happens when I have all 6 of them? Why am I going at the pace of my class? Like, what's the point? Are you guys seeing what I'm saying? There is no point. Now, I'm not saying we don't need teachers. I just think we need a new kind of teacher. A teacher that focuses on the formation of the child and mastery at a massive level that we've never seen before. The kind of mastery that will give us people like this again. That's what Mr. Amos is saying. No, don't lower the bar. Take what I learned when I was in school and double it. Why? Because your children have the most powerful calculators in history. If you give them the same thing you gave me, we're actually doing them a disservice. Over to you, Mr. Chinonso.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amos, for that wonderful perspective. Yeah, so we have a couple of other questions. We'll see how many we'll answer as many as we can in the given time. So the next question here, how should schools be changing now that AI can do so much of what students used to be tested and graded on? So how should school change?
First of all, please, parents, if you're on this call, check out the book, For the Children's Sake. For the Children's Sake. This book is by Susan Macaulay. So For the Children's Sake, and my team members can put it in the chat too. I'll send you a picture. So For the Children's Sake, how should schools be changing? I would be very honest and straight to the point in what needs to happen. The first thing that needs to happen is we need to see a lot more people not actually first of all, the school needs to be honest and just like, it's almost like they need to just be honest and say, you know what? We don't fully know what we're doing on certain things. So the schools need to be honest and say, we don't know, right? And so if they say we don't know, give me 1 second, sorry. Okay, so the schools need to say we don't know, and here's what needs to happen. Every teacher needs to step back and answer these questions. Like, we need to address these questions. Because parents, so there's something about AI that we don't hear enough about, and we're actually doing a whole book study with parents on a book called 2084. So the AI is like a sharp knife. You can use it. It has benefits, but it has some serious downsides, especially when it enters education without, as Paul Meyer said, unstrategic AI implementation is dangerous. Those are the words he used, right? Unstrategic AI implementation is dangerous. So what I would tell schools is this: from pre-K to 5th grade, okay, from pre-K to 4th grade, all the children need to know, and they probably see it around them, is that AI is a part of the world. Okay, it's there. We know it's there. But their focus should be really strengthening their mental faculties. They should be reading a lot. They should be read to a lot. They should need to be wrestling with those kinds of things. That's what we need to do in the elementary. In the middle school and the high school, we need to raise the bar. Children need to do calculus, I would argue, as early as possible. What that means is that if we reduce the timeline to get to calculus, it would increase the rigor, which means that the children, even if they try to use AI, would be challenged because they're doing things that are very difficult. But the current school system, AI was built on the data of the current school system. What that means is that right now, every assignment is in that AI. Every assignment can be done by that AI. So if a school is giving assignments that AI can do, then they are not doing that child a service, especially if they also have given that child a computer to use. Are you guys seeing what I'm saying? So we need to go back to pen and paper. We need to go back to debate. We need to go back to presentations, speaking and doing presentations. We need to reduce an emphasis on standardized testing as a metric for success. Yes, students should still take some of these tests, but it's almost like we're just doing it. Okay, we've got it out of the way. Now we come to the student and tell them, explain to me why Faraday's work influenced James Clerk Maxwell's equations. Okay, where's that in any test? That's not in any test. Those are the questions we need to start asking. The other thing Mr. Meyer said, or Dr. Meyer said last Saturday, was that we need to start asking the students to judge the output of the AI. We need to actually give the students an AI answer and say, here you go. Is this true? Now the student is judging the AI. Do you know that a lot of students trust the output of AI without judging it? They just trust that since the computer gave it to me, it must be true. That's not true. But here's the problem. And this is what I was saying last week briefly. Students might have thought that AI will help them not have to work hard. That's not true. You actually need to be smarter even in the age of AI now, because you need to be able to judge the AI. Are you guys seeing what I'm saying? But our school systems are not generating people that are very, very smart at scale. So who's going to fill the gap? The parents, the tutors. Every child needs to have a mentor and a tutor. That's the other thing that needs to change. Every child, even if your child is the best in America, get them a mentor and a tutor. Doesn't matter. Did he have a mentor? The greatest mathematician in history by many accounts? Yes, he did. That's my point. If the greatest had mentors, who are we not to? Are you seeing what I'm saying? So parents, if your school does not orchestrate or get that in order, you have to find a mentor for your child. And of course, Life Academy is part of that mentoring community, but you will have to find one that works for your child and their schedule. Thank you, Mr. Chinonso. I'll keep the rest of the answers brief.
All right, yeah, thank you so much. That's quite interesting. So just like you mentioned, every child needs a mentor, needs an advisor, and one of the things we do at Life is we provide students with these kind of mentorship. So the next question we have here is what can history teach us about moments education itself had to be completely reinvented? So, following the trends in history. So, what can history teach us about moments education itself had to be completely reinvented? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a friend of mine named Daniel Olushola. He wrote a book here. It's called On the Decline of Meaning and Recovery of True Learning, When the Soul No Longer Counts. When the Soul No Longer Counts. That's the name of this one. And I would say that he does a great job of giving us some of the pieces of the puzzle we need to be thinking about. You guys heard in the beginning of our webinar, maybe we'll play the song at the end again. We played a little bit of a classical piece. Those classical pieces would have come around the time of the 1700s, right? So when you look at history, there was a long period of time where school was not a thing, like anything you know. There was no such thing. So people learned at home and then they went to work with their parents and they went to the community blacksmith and worked for them. That was what school used to look like, right? And so when the Industrial Revolution came, we had to make some changes, right? So massive changes there. We are now living in another type of industrial revolution. That's literally where we are right now. So what history can teach us is we need to go back to when we knew things were solid and produced some of the top thinkers. Let me list a few names and you'll notice that time period. Galileo Galilei, born around 1500. Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, Michael Faraday, Leonard Euler, Carl Friedrich Gauss. What you will find is that most of them lived from about 1550 to 1850. Most of the greatest mathematicians and thinkers all lived before 1850. That's interesting. So what happened after 1850? Well, in 1859, Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, on the origin of species. So then the question, and I know you're a biologist, but you have a biology background too. The question starts becoming, what is a human being? So it's almost like it challenged the question of a human being. Karl Marx wrote his book, right? We got Friedrich Nietzsche. The 1850 to 1950, the world was bombarded with multiple secular humanist philosophies, ideas that basically do not hinge on the fact that children are created in the image of God. What that tells us is let's go back to the time period before 1850 and let's examine what people believed about human beings at a more greater detail. People like James Clerk Maxwell and Michael Faraday believed in God, and it didn't inhibit their science, it propelled their science. So history teaches us that just because a person has faith doesn't mean they can be rigorous in science. And therefore, we need a time now to come where philosophy and faith and logic and theology, like the disciplines, need to come back together like they used to be. This separation of disciplines is a problem. And the AI revolution is evidence that it needs to end. Let me explain. Do you know that in AI research, there are biologists, neuroscientists, chemists, physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, economists, all working together? Isn't that interesting? But in our school systems, we tend to silo people apart. You go over there, you go over there. Let me say one thing to Africa specifically. And I say this with all respect, and I'm grateful for my teachers, people like Mr. Waziri, who taught me chemistry, and Mrs. Voa, and many of my teachers. We need to start teaching chemistry and physics again together. We need to start teaching math and physics again together. We need the students to see their math and their physics teachers talking. We need them to see interaction, because at the end of the day, and then let me say one more thing to the schools in Africa. In Africa, there's a famous thing where you have an arts class, science class, social science class. I plead, and I know the Minister of Education is probably not on this call, but I plead that needs to end. Children need to learn the history, philosophy, math, and science, and they should not be restricted by the criteria our systems are using. That is actually not good at this time. I am a physicist and chemist and mathematician by God's grace. I write math programs, but I'll tell you this, I had to teach myself history, or I had to find ways to learn history. I had to find ways to learn philosophy. How cool would it have been if I also learned that when I was in school? Parents and teachers in Africa, please, let's end the arts class, science class, social science. And instead, let's tell children who might have been pushed to arts class because they were bad at math, let's tell them that sometimes what you need is a teacher. Euler dictated his book to a tailor, and that tailor became very good at math. People can become very good at math. People can become very good at physics. It's not I was born with it or not fundamentally. What that means, parents, then, is that please take back and look at, okay, why did your child fail math? Did it have anything to do with their ability? Or was it maybe because of the teacher or the school? Parents, you're going to have to advocate for your children 1,000-fold. And if you need any insights and support, let us know. And we'll be happy to walk this road with you. The AI revolution will disrupt education in such a way that watch the next 2 to 3 years. It will be so disruptive that if you were not ready ahead of time, you would be confused. But if you were ready ahead of time, you would be like, we knew it was going to happen. We knew agentic AI was going to grow. We knew that the school systems were going to struggle. And therefore, we gave our children what they needed so that our children are doing fine, even though the AI disrupted the system. Help your children be like Euler, and they will be fine no matter what comes in the academic setting. Over to you, sir.
Ryan, thank you so much. That's interesting. So, you answered the question aptly and also made some points clear. So, I would love to let the parents know that in the coming weeks and months, Life will be having the capacity to train our students and our children in diverse subjects. So you can keep look out for those things as they come out. And then also you can visit our website. It's in the comments, in the chat box. Please feel free. So the next question we have here is how does a parent figure out their own philosophy of education if they've genuinely never thought about it before?
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
part of why we have Saturday school, right? Parents, we're going to be providing. So think of it like this, parents. Everybody needs to go back to school right now. Everybody. Everybody needs to go back and learn the things they didn't learn, like philosophy, history, education, everybody, right? Because therefore, what we're going to do at the Saturday school is we're going to record these lectures and these webinars, and we're going to invite other people. So next Saturday, I have a guest who will be coming, and he will be sharing some details about how we're collaborating. We're collaborating with a company in Nigeria that does work in education as well. And so next Saturday, we'll be talking to some of those people, and then we probably need to do a whole nother session with Chinonso as well, and discuss the things that he does. And so I think that we need to have regular meetings for parents. And so parents, think of yourself getting an education again. That's what is going to have to happen. And by the way, parents, the teachers at your children's school, a lot of them are literally going to need to go back to school. So that's why I'm saying, parents, you are the quickest way to success for your children, faster than any school system can train the teachers to catch up on. So the first step is please read this, if you don't mind, for the children's sake, and then let's have a discussion about it. Let's talk about what the ideas are in For the Sake of the Children, where she's the philosophy of education of Charlotte Mason is the closest one to getting you to understand the philosophy of education. And then let's have some dialogue. So we'll put that on the record that we need to start having basically almost like a philosophy of education class. That's a class that parents can take and just learn about the philosophy of education and then help your children. Parents, your children are going to need you. They are going to need you, and you're going to also need a rock to stand on because the AI revolution will disrupt every industry. So it will disrupt education, but it will actually disrupt your own jobs, right? Medicine is being influenced by AI. Everything is going to be influenced. It's going to disrupt everything in this. And disruption is not always bad, but it's just you have to understand what it's doing. Let me give you an example of how AI is already in medicine. When you get an X-ray or a CT scan, do you know that AI can read the images now, sometimes faster and sometimes even better than a radiologist that is trained? So that means that there are areas where seeing it being used that is helping. Imagine a village in Nigeria that doesn't have a hospital, but they get one AI-powered system and they don't have a radiologist nearby. That AI can read that the person has a stroke so that you can start driving them to a city faster than because you don't have a radiologist nearby, right? So my point is, this is why we had last week the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But you have to navigate all of that. Well, what field of study does the best for helping us navigate that? It's philosophy. Philosophy. So, but how many people learn philosophy, right? So the point is, every parent needs to get a philosophy of education class. Every child in high school needs to take philosophy because the type of disruption coming we haven't seen before. And it's coming faster than the Industrial Revolution, and it's going to have a greater scale than the Industrial Revolution. I don't know if parents are seeing why I'm saying your children will need you. They will need you to have difficult conversations. Imagine somebody who went to school to become a paralegal, and now they've graduated, and then they find out that AI is now good enough to do the job they were going to do. Guess what that person needs to do? They need to go back to school. Some people are literally about to graduate, and they have to go back and get a new degree. So what degrees are tangible? What degrees are we sure are not going anywhere? We had a webinar on this a while ago. It's on our Life YouTube channel, which is Life Academy, the future of education. We have a whole webinar. So parents, if your children are thinking of studying certain things, please parents, examine those things. Make sure those things actually are durable because some things will not be needed anymore. And new jobs will be created. But your children will need you as their parents to just be there for support, for your love and kindness and support at such a time as this. So, parents, what do you think of a philosophy of education class for parents? That's a good question. I love that question. Parents, can you guys tell us in the chat, what do you think? You can vote anonymously too in the Q&A box. So, okay, so I think we've hit the nail on the head. Any other questions?
So I think we can take maybe one more or two as time permits. I'm seeing a question here. If a family could clarify just one belief about education this month, what would help most?
Well, the first thing I need parents to know, and what I'm about to say might sound controversial, but there's a reason I'm saying it. School as a knowledge delivery mechanism is now an obsolete idea. You don't need to go to school to just learn a thing. No. As a matter of fact, it's actually sometimes very bad to do that. Yes, for some children, going to school is actually going to be very bad. The reason is because a person who's self-driven, who's put into a system that paces them slower than they want to move and that they can move, that's a disservice to that child. So parents, you have to really sit down with your children and then try to understand, okay, how has God made you to serve humanity? What are your gifts and your talents and your abilities? So parents, that's number one, is really zoom into your child. Have a journal for every one of your children. As you're praying for them, as you're observing things, write them down and then discuss that with that child's mentor. Your child will need a mentor. Remember the days of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle? Those guys were like mentors of one another. That's the education system of the future, parents. The idea of one teacher in front of a room with 25 kids, some of whom don't want to be there, or 45 or 55, that era is gone. You guys remember when I talked about Africa a little bit earlier, and I want to say this again in love. And by God's grace, we're planning to build a few schools in Africa, and we're working on our planning. And one of the things that we're trying to do is this. We're trying to say the notes that the teachers write on the board in Africa, everything can be put into a system that they don't have to write those notes on the board. Do you know that the best teacher I've had, one of the best teachers in my whole life, even when I've come to America, one of the best teachers in my whole life, he never wrote notes on the board. I'm not saying writing notes on the board are bad, but he was the only teacher I ever had who never wrote notes on the board. What did he do instead? He gave his notes to students to copy before class. So then when we came to class, we already had the notes. Do you see? So we already had the notes. So what did he do when he came? He was able to expand our understanding. That teacher, I have a YouTube video on him on my personal YouTube channel. That teacher basically was the one who inspired me partly to become a chemist and a physicist and so on. That teacher. Not only did I get an A1 in our chemistry exams in the WIEC, we thank God, but it was also, I'm a physicist today partly because of him. Isn't that interesting? So the thing we do in African schools where we write notes on the board for most of our time, it's not going to work anymore and shouldn't be done because the information is already there. What we need instead is to invest in how are you today, John? So the philosophy of education, I think the fundamental one we need to focus on is asking the question, what is this child, like how is the child doing as a human being? And how am I helping them to become more, like to flourish more as God has made them to be? Question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, thank you so much. So we have a few other questions here, and so I'll just read them out. So now this is personal to you. It says, what did your schooling teach you to value, and do you still agree with it? I mean, it's like a long time ago. So what has changed?
So first of all, Mr. Waziri's lecture is in your WhatsApp channel. So if you can please post it in the chat, that'll be great. This is the
All
man
right,
I was
thank
telling
you.
about, the man who opened my eyes to the atom and one of the best teachers in my history, Mr. Peter Waziri. I would say that sometimes in life, and even in the Bible, it talks about this, where there are times and there are seasons. In the season of the era that I lived in, I got some of the best education that was possible. Let me repeat, in the season, in the era that I lived in. So from 1999 to 2005, that education I got was one of the best you could get at that time. If you were to copy that same education model and paste it today, it would not be as good for me. I don't know if you see what I'm saying. Sometimes it's about the times and the seasons. And so I would say, parents, one of the key things we all have to pay attention to is we need to grow in discernment, and we need to understand the times and the seasons. So we're going to do a book study with parents called 2084, as I said, by John Lennox. And maybe, so that program starts the last Saturday, so the 29th of August. And we're going to be doing that earlier in the day, so an hour before the webinar time. So that is going to be a philosophy of education class, if that makes sense. And so I already talked with a parent about this, and they also studied Charlotte Mason a lot. So we might even have them share about Charlotte Mason as a guest speaker. The Charlotte Mason method is something that people basically can even almost like get a master's degree, so to speak, informally. They can go deep into it. But what I would say is that I was blessed to receive the type of education I received at the time that I received it. But I think that we need to recognize that there are times and there are seasons. And I don't think that it is the time now to just go with sit down. You're now in seventh grade, eighth grade, ninth grade, and you only learn the things we've set aside that you should learn at such a time as this. That model is no longer sufficient. It is now the era of what do I want to solve? How do I solve it? And people like Michael Faraday on Christmas Day are doing research in their office because he was helped, like there was a problem he wanted to solve. That's what I'm saying. The time has come for that. How do I solve problems beyond anything my school would give me? So to answer the question, the new form of education that needs to become that needs to go everywhere needs to be built. And it needs to be built on the basis of going back in history to the 1700s and building it based on that, because we know that that worked. What we're doing now won't work for the AI revolution, guaranteed. And parents, I say that because, again, I do research in some of these AI models and I see where things are going. And what people think they've seen, this is just the beginning. When these systems get more and more and more sophisticated, our education system literally doesn't stand a chance. Like, it's like a coming train. One thing has to go. It's either the AI goes or our education system goes. But I can guarantee you that with the amount of money that a lot of some of these people are backing on the AI models, it's just going to put the education system down. That's why I'm saying, parents, we need to all be educated on the philosophy of education and get ready for what's coming. So I'm grateful for what I received, but I'm sorry to say it will not cut it going forward for anybody. Now, should we still memorize? Should we still be able to get an A in Ababiu? Yes, but the method we use to learn Ababiu does not have to be with 80 to 90 children in one room trying to listen to one lecture going at the pace of which the teacher is going. We need to split into smaller groups of about 12 to 15, right? I tell people I like 12. Jesus had 12 disciples, right? 12 is a great number. And so let's just go with about one teacher to 12 students. And parents, that's the future of education. Small pods of learning year round. Let me give one more advice to parents in America. If your child attends school in America, they are at a disservice. If your child attends a K-12 school in America, please remember they are at a disservice because the system is not raising the bar. In America, they've actually lowered the bar at a time when countries are raising the bar. So the reason why I say that is summer break for 3 months. What are we doing? Giving children 3 months off to do what? Right? And some of them are playing video games and watching movies, and their brain is literally being wasted. So my advice is, parents, we have to move to a year-round school system. Year-round. No stopping, year-round. That's the way forward. Of course, they should rest on Sundays, but otherwise, what are they doing with their lives? We did a different webinar on social media. Do you know how that's destroying their lives? The free time these children have is literally destroying their lives. And so, parents, the best thing you can do for your child right now is give them a more rigorous education, because you just might save them in terms of them destroying their lives with distractions. That might actually save them. So make your children do calculus at a young age, maybe at the age of 12 or 13 or 14. Let them work hard. I'm just giving an example. No, I don't want children to start a riot, but we need to get children to work harder. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Yeah, thank you. So one practical question here. This is, how do you talk to a teen about what education is really for? So how do we talk to teenagers, then get them to understand what we're doing?
It's back to this book. So I think that parents, take a book like this and then spend a Saturday 1 hour with your child and just say, can we talk about some of the things? Mr. Amos was bringing up some ideas that the current education system is expired. And I would even go so far to say, it's not only that our current education system is expired, is that it's actually now toxic. And I'm just being honest, it's actually toxic. It's not healthy for you to go at the pace of a teacher when you can go faster or you can go further. Why are you wasting time? That's what I'm saying. What are we doing? And so my point is, you need to sit down with your child and tell your child, I know you're capable of so much more, and the school system might not have pushed you enough. I need to now step in and help you move further, because I know you can do more. I know you can do more. That's what you need to encourage your child to realize. You've been made in the image of God. You've been given gifts and talents and abilities. Are you using them all? If you're not, how can I support you, John? How can I support you, Cynthia? That's what education needs to be thinking about. So please gather your children and just give them that advice. And then maybe have them watch a documentary on Charlotte Mason. Just go on YouTube, Charlotte Mason or Dorothy Sayers, watch a documentary, and then you can go from there. So.
Great, Amos. So one final question here. Is it possible to have a clear philosophy of education and still change your mind later? So does it change, or is it, dynamic nature of things?
Yeah, I think it can change. And Michael Faraday actually talked about this in his book, the idea of you might believe one thing, but you might change it later. Let me just read you the sentence here. This is for Michael Faraday. So this is, let me see his, let's see the chapter. So this is Dr. Stephen Odiabo's book. He's actually based in Houston, Texas. I know he does some of his work there. And Dr. Odiabo is quoting Michael Faraday, and he talks about the idea of humility in learning. We need to come to education with humility. Like, parents, keep in mind that I wasn't trained with Charlotte Mason. That wasn't my philosophy of education. But the more I've observed things, the more I've come to realize is that we need to be open to change. And that is where I'm really afraid for Africa. I'm just being very honest. I'm very afraid, because if Africa does not tackle education head on, it will actually go into, I would say, sadly, almost like disconnection from the rest of the world. Because some of the world is more open to, like Japan, for example. They're like, we got to move, we got to change this and that. But it's like, I have not heard that anything is changing in Africa in education in the next year. I don't know if you've heard anything different. I feel like everybody's going to come back to school. We're going to have first, second, and third term. We're just following the routine at such a time as this, where the routine is no longer sufficient, if you see what I mean. And so I think that Faraday says this. Let me just read you guys this. And I know we're wrapping up, but let me read you a quick quote from Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday says that the laws of nature as we understand them are the foundation of our knowledge in natural things. And he says, so much as we know of them has been developed by successive energies of the highest intellect exerted through many ages. After a most rigid and scrutinizing examination upon principle and trial, a definite expression has been given to them. They have become, as it were, our belief or trust. So when an idea has been tested for a long period of time, sometimes we begin to take it as law. We're like, this is the only way this thing can be done. And what will happen then is that we begin to not want to change. We think that this is it. So even me, okay, I believe closely tied to more of the Charlotte Mason model, But there are things that I have to still think for myself on, and I might have to make tweaks, right? And so therefore, Faraday says we have no interest. So from day to day, we still examine and test our expressions of these ideas. We have no interest in their retention if erroneous. On the contrary, the greatest discovery a man could ever make would be to prove that one of these accepted laws was erroneous, and his greatest honor would be the discovery. Neither should there be any desire to retain the former expression, for we know that the new or amended law would be far more productive in results and would greatly increase our intellectual acquisitions and will prove an abundant source of fresh delight to the mind. Here's what Faraday is saying. Faraday is saying that essentially, even in science, you might encounter an idea that was thought to be a fact and a law, but guess what? You realize there are some mistakes that need to be addressed, which will affect how we go forward. That's the same thing with the philosophy of education. So every parent needs to become grounded in understanding the philosophy of education enough to be able to debate with an education system that might be different from theirs and able to still stand on what they might believe on education. So that means that, again, every parent should basically just get an education training background, not only because you have to teach your own children, but even in your job place, they might need you to learn something. And if you have an understanding of how to learn, you would be better at your job. If you see what I'm saying. Like knowing how to learn and learning the importance of just the framework of how to think is going to be important in the AI revolution. Parents, we all have to go learn that more and more at such a time as this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amos. So, in closing, I just have a question for you just to help our parents and families. So, if a family makes only one change over the next, say, 30 days, what's the single most important thing you would want them to do to build a clear, intentional philosophy of education for their children?
That's an excellent question. I know there's a lot that was said there. I think number one, please try and join us in the philosophy of education discussions where it looks like this is something, as I'm sharing, I'm realizing that this is something that's going to be new to so many families. So let's spend time. Let's just spend time on this together. Number two, parents, your children will need more community than ever before. Even AI scientists, some of them are saying that they're surprised how fast it's moved, to the point where sometimes you don't know if it was a human being that wrote something or if it was a machine. What that means is that, and this is already happening, is that some children will be spending too much time with chatbots and not enough with human beings. Parents, family dinners have to come back. That's one of the first places. Have dinner with your family and talk to your children about the things they're encountering, because your children are going to encounter a lot of things very fast. So please spend quality time of just sitting down, right? So on my calendar, I was talking with my wife, and it's like, we're going to block off a certain time where it's like, from this time to this time, this is how things will be, and so on and so forth, right? So I want to encourage families. You're going to have to, this is going to be something where you have to build the atmosphere for dialogue with your children. You have to build the atmosphere. And then the last thing I'll say on this, so please check out For the Children's Sake. This is For the Children's Sake. The name of this book is just says For the Children's Sake. So check out For the Children's Sake. And then parents, teach your children that school and learning are not the same thing. Somebody once said, and they try to quote Albert Einstein. I'm not sure if he's the one who actually said it. Sometimes we try to quote Einstein just to give an extra boost to the quote. So I don't know if I trust this particular reference. But the idea was, I will not allow, oh, sorry, Mark Twain, I think they were quoting, I will not allow schooling get in the way of my education. Ouch. I will not allow schooling to get in the way of my education. Doesn't that make you think? What does that mean? That means that going to school doesn't mean you're going to be educated. But parents, if the goal is to get your children educated, then what do you do instead? We take back charge. This is the time. Not saying we don't need teachers and mentors and so on. We need them, but the parents call the shots. Not a state, not nobody else. Now, if you are bound, and I know some countries, they have some laws that forbid you to homeschool or forbid you to do the private school. Here's what I would say. If your child has to go to Babylon, let them be like Daniel. They're in Babylon, but they're like Daniel. And then at home, give your child everything they need. The love, the care, and the community, so that they can become all God that has made them to be. Thank you, Mr. Chinonso, and thank you to everybody for joining us. We'll be back same time every
Yeah,
Saturday. So,
yeah, thank you so much, Amos, for sharing your wisdom with us today. And of course, thank you to everyone who joined from around the world. Remember, education isn't, neutral. Someone's philosophy is always shaping it. And today's session was about making sure that as individuals, we are the ones, forming those perspectives. So we hope you are living with more clarity than you came with. And of course, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you in our next class next Saturday. Thank you so much. But before we go, I would love to crave your indulgence. We'll be having our feedback survey just after the meeting. Make sure you click on the link, drop your feedback, and we would love to iterate and improve on our subsequent meetings. So please make sure you fill out that survey. Thank you so much. And please do have a wonderful day ahead. Bye. Thank you. Bye.